The iPad Pro 2, the second generation iPad Pro, is finally here. Even though it's not really called the iPad Pro 2, it's actually called the iPad Pro 2017, or the iPad Pro second generation. But yeah, I did a Final Leaks and Rumors episode on the iPad Pro 2017 a couple of weeks ago, and overall, it's basically the same thing that I was expecting it to be, with a few exceptions, a few really good exceptions actually. So the 12.9 inches iPad Pro is still here. It did get some spec improvements, which I'm going to cover in a second, but the 9.7 inches iPad Pro is dead. So yeah, Apple killed the 9.7 inches iPad Pro. But that's because there's a new iPad Pro, a 10.5 inches iPad Pro. So this is basically the replacement for the 9.7 inches iPad Pro. So welcome to the Zone of Tech. I'm Daniel, and here's 10 really interesting things you need to know about the new 2017 iPad Pros. So as always, grab some popcorn and enjoy. Okay, so number one, probably the best feature or the biggest change when it comes to the new iPad Pros, especially the 10.5 inches iPad Pro, isn't the display size increase. It's actually a function that's called ProMotion. Okay, so what's ProMotion? Well, usually displays have a refresh rate of 60 Hertz, usually. So 90% of the displays out there have a 60 Hertz refresh rate. Some of them have weird numbers like 75, or some of them 120, and some of them even more than 120. But usually most of them have a refresh rate of 60 Hertz. Most likely the monitor or the device that you're watching this video from as well. Now with the new 2017 iPad Pros, Apple has actually increased the refresh rate from 60 Hertz to 120 Hertz. So they doubled the refresh rate, which is insane on a tablet. You usually see this on gaming monitors or high-end monitors. But yeah, seeing this on a tablet is really, really impressive. 60 Hertz looks great, but 120 Hertz looks amazing. It simply feels, especially when you're scrolling through a web page or a document, it feels like you're actually moving that page in real life. That's how smooth it actually is. Now, since most of you don't have 120 Hertz monitors, I cannot really show you that, but a good comparison would be comparing a game that runs at 30 frames per second versus a game that runs at 60 frames per second. If any of you have 120 Hertz monitors and you've played a game at 120 frames per second versus 60, that's basically the difference that you'll see in the iPad Pro 2017 as well. But it's not just scrolling in Safari or documents or using the Apple Pencil that's going to make this feel like real life. It's also games as well. Now, at the moment, there are no games that actually run at 120 frames per second on the iPads, but I'm guessing that at some point, some games will run at 120 frames per second. So they're going to look really, really fluid. But wait, there's actually more. So ProMotion isn't the refresh rate. ProMotion is actually a function that allows the iPad Pro's display to adjust its refresh rate depending on what content you actually view. So for example, if you're scrolling a document or in Safari, you'll have 120 frames per second or 120 Hertz. But if you're just watching a movie that was shot in 24p, then you're only going to have a 24 Hertz refresh rate. If you're watching a YouTube video, you're going to have a 30 frames per second refresh rate or 30 Hertz. But if you're looking at a still photo or reading a page from a book, then the refresh rate is going to go even lower than 30 Hertz, so somewhere around 15. So this will help preserve battery life, because obviously running the display at 120 Hertz all the time will actually have an impact on battery life. And even running it at 60 Hertz when it's not needed, even that also has an impact on battery life. So ProMotion, 120 Hertz refresh rate on the iPad Pros, this is definitely one of the biggest improvements in the new iPad Pros. I do hope that this is coming with the iPhone 8 as well, even though I don't really think so. That would be awesome. But I don't think it's coming with the iPhone. At least not yet. Maybe next year, most likely. Then number two, the new iPad Pros come with a brand new Apple A10X chip. Now, this is the most powerful processor inside any iOS device. But just to give you an idea of how powerful this thing actually is, it's insanely powerful. So here I have a couple of benchmarks. Here we have the new iPad Pros, the 2016 iPad Pros, and also the 2017 and 2016 MacBook Pros 13-inch. Now these are the highest end options that you can get. So the 3.5 GHz Intel Core i7 processor in the 2017 one, Kaby Lake, the Iris Plus 650 graphics, and this is how they compare to the new iPad Pros. So in Geekbench 4, when it comes to a single core score, the new iPad Pros are actually really close to the highest end 13-inch MacBook Pros that you can get right now. I mean, it's a 600-700 point difference But even that is really impressive considering that these are just some tablets. Now, taking a look at the multi-core, here the result is even more impressive. So the 2017 iPad Pros actually surpassed the 2016 13-inch MacBook Pro. So yeah, they're more powerful than the Skylake top-of-the-line i7 processor that you can get in the 13-inch models. The 2017 model was indeed more powerful, but again, not by that much. Now, taking a look at some graphics benchmarks, here we have Geekbench 4 again, but this is the compute benchmark run in Metal, and just take a look at these scores. 2016 iPad Pros versus 2017 iPad Pros, huge difference there. Basically get double the performance when it comes to the GPU, but those numbers are actually higher than the 13-inch MacBook Pros. So yeah, these are more powerful than the integrated graphics that you can get with something like the Intel Iris 650. Moving on to GFX Bench, here the 2017 iPad Pros again defeated the MacBook Pros 2017 and 2016. And finally, when it comes to the Manhattan benchmark, also run in Metal, 44 frames per second and 42 on the new iPad Pros versus 36, 37 that we got in the MacBook Pros. So the new iPad Pros are more powerful than the most powerful MacBook Pro 13-inch at least 2017 that you can get right now, which is really impressive. This is a tablet that's a full-fledged computer. Honestly, this makes me believe that Apple is indeed working on switching to their own built-in processors with the next generation MacBooks. I'm not talking about the 2018 ones, but maybe in 2020, 2022 or something like that. I do see Apple moving to ARM processors in the future MacBooks. Now, also speaking of the performance, you can edit 4K videos on the new iPad Pros. Now, you could do this before, but you can even edit at 60 Hz or 60 frames per second and even 120 if you have something that shoots 4K at 120. So really impressive, again, considering that these are just some tablets. And then you can use apps such as AstroPad on the iPad and use the full Photoshop, the full Adobe Photoshop on the iPad, and many more apps. Now, Apple says that the iPad Pro is more powerful than most laptops out there, and this is definitely believable. Now, it's obviously not more powerful than the 15-inch MacBook Pro because that one comes with a quad-core processor, which also comes with 8 threads versus 2 and 4, but still, really impressive performance. Now, just to give you an idea of how powerful the iPad Pro really is, how much powerful do you think the iPad Pro is, this one, when compared to something like the iPad 2 or the iPad 1, a first generation iPad? Now, you'd probably say 10 times more powerful than a first generation iPad. Well, it's actually 500 times more powerful than a first generation iPad, at least when it comes to the GPU. 500 times more powerful than the first generation iPad. Let that sink in a bit. The Apple A10X chip is now a 6-core processor and also comes with a 12-core GPU. So the question is, do you really need that much performance in a tablet? Let me know in the comments. Next up, speaking of the performance, we finally have 4 gigabytes in the 10.5 inches iPad Pro as well. Previously, we only had 4 gigabytes in the larger 12.9 inch model, but now we have 4 gigabytes in both the 12.9 inches and this one at 10.5 inches iPad Pro. Now, in case you're thinking of using your old accessories, so cases, even keyboards, external keyboards that have a built-in slot for the iPad, it won't actually work with this one because the 10.5 inches iPad Pro is actually a bit taller, so it's actually 1 centimeter taller, not just a bit. 1 centimeter is quite a substantial difference. So 1 centimeter taller, 5 millimeters wider. The thickness did remain the same at 6.1 millimeters thick, but it's now heavier by 32 grams, which I know is not a lot, so it's 469 grams now. So not a huge difference when it comes to the size increase, especially since the display size increase is definitely worth it. Now, I was hoping that Apple would reduce the bezels even more and maybe even remove the home button completely, but yeah, that will happen maybe in a future iPad after the iPhone 8 is released. Now, I want to mention a few things when it comes to the display. So on the 12.9 inches iPad Pro, the display size has remained the same and also the resolution. Now, on the 10.5 inches iPad Pro, the resolution has actually increased. Obviously, that's because the display size has also increased, but the interesting thing here is that Apple has this really weird thing where they actually calculate the PPI and then they adjust the resolution so that you actually get the PPI for that display size. So for example, on the new iPad Pros, you still have 264 PPI, same as before. So yeah, it's really weird. Same thing happens with the iPhones. Like they really like the 326 number. That's why they keep increasing the display size on the smallest iPhone, for example, but they do keep 326 PPI for some reason. On the Plus models, you do have 401, but even on the Apple Watch, you still have that 326 number. So 326 and 264, quite some interesting numbers that Apple likes. Now, also when it comes to the display, the brightness has been increased as well. So now we have a 600 nits brightness on the new iPad Pros, which is a lot. So just to give you an idea of how much this is, the new MacBook Pros of 2017 and 2016 models also have, well, they have 500 nits, so 100 less. And the new iMacs, the 2017 iMacs, have 500 nits. So the iPad 2017s are actually the brightest devices that Apple is selling. Well, apart from the Apple Watch, which can go up to 1000 nits, but yeah, that's an exception. So this means that if you use your iPads outdoors a lot, this is going to make a pretty big difference. And number 6, we finally have the exact same specs on both the iPad Pros. So previously there were so many differences between those two iPads, and I made a separate video just on that. So for example, the new iPad Pro 9.7 inches actually had a faster processor. So the CPU ran at a higher clock. Now we have the exact same clock speed on both iPads. So triple core 2.39 GHz processor. This is for the high performance cores because you also have 3 low performance cores. Again, 4 GB of RAM on both, a DCI-P3 display on both, which was previously only on the 9.7 inches iPad Pro, that 120 Hz display on both, True Tone display, Retina flash, and yeah, pretty much everything is on both iPads finally. So the only difference would be the larger display on the 12.9 inches iPad Pro and the fact that it's a bit thicker, and it also comes with a larger battery, but overall it's exactly the same device. And yes, they finally have the exact same cameras as well. Now, speaking of cameras, this is something that I wasn't expecting to change. So the iPad Pro 9.7 inches had the iPhone 6s cameras on both the front and the back, which were actually pretty good. But the 2017 iPad Pros actually borrowed the iPhone 7's camera. So you have the exact same camera modules as the iPhone 7. So everything from the iPhone 7's camera, including that front-facing 7 megapixel cameras there, that quad LED flash on the back is also there. Everything except, including the optical image stabilization. We finally have optical image stabilization on the iPad Pros as well. Everything except for that dual camera module that you have on the iPhone 7 Plus is here on the iPads as well. I never really thought that the camera on the iPad Pro 9.7 inches needed an improvement, but we finally got it. But what do you guys think? Do you think Apple should have improved the cameras like they did on the iPad Pros, or they should have kept the iPhone 6s cameras? Because in the end, it's a tablet, and keep in mind that improving the cameras also increases the production cost of the device. So that's also one of the reasons why the iPad Pro is more expensive now. At number 8, I mentioned before that there were so many differences between the 12.9 inches iPad Pro and the 9.7 inches iPad Pro last year. Now, one of the differences was actually USB, the Lightning connection. So basically, the Lightning connection on the 12.9 inches iPad Pro was USB 3.0, and on the 9.7 inches iPad Pro was only USB 2.0. So if you transferred photos or anything from a different device, it would transfer much slower on the iPad Pro 9.7 inches. So 480 megabits per second versus 5 gigabits per second. Yeah, USB 3.0 is almost, actually more than 10 times faster than USB 2.0. So the good news here is that we finally have USB 3.0 transfer speeds on both 2017 iPad Pros. So if you want to transfer photos or videos from a DSLR camera, you can do that. You can simply purchase a Lightning to SD card adapter, and that's how you can transfer your photos. Then the accessories for the iPad Pro also got some pretty big improvements as well. So the Apple Smart Keyboard for the iPad Pro for the 10.5 inches iPad Pro is now larger, since the iPad is also larger. It's now a full-size keyboard, and by full-size keyboard, I don't mean that you actually have extra keys. The keys themselves are just larger than on the 9.7 inches iPad Pro. But then the Apple Pencil got some even bigger improvements. So the latency was reduced from 49 milliseconds to just 20 milliseconds. That's a huge improvement, and the fastest input pen out there aside from the Apple Pencil is the new Microsoft Surface Pen. That's rated at 21 milliseconds. So yeah, the Apple Pencil is just 1 second faster than the Microsoft Surface Pen. Now, as far as I know, the Apple Pencil wasn't changed, so you can still use the first generation Apple Pencil if you have one. The only difference is that the display on the iPad Pro is so much better now. So since it has a 120 frames per second refresh rate or 120 Hertz, it also reduced the latency for the Apple Pencil. But the hardware inside the Apple Pencil, as far as I know, it's the same as the first generation. So if you want to do any sort of graphic design on the iPad Pro, and I'm guessing that most of you probably do, then the Apple Pencil is currently the best option, at least when it comes to latency. So this is the most responsive input pen out there. Yes, even beating any Wacom stylus or any Cintiq styluses. So pretty impressive. Now, a few more things that I want to mention. So the software keyboard on the 10.5 inches iPad Pro is now a full-size keyboard. So again, you don't actually get any extra keys but the keys themselves are larger, just as on the physical Apple Smart Keyboard. And there's no 32GB option anymore, so the storage has actually been doubled. So 32 became 64, 128 became 256, and then we also have a 512GB option, which is just crazy in an iPad. But some people need it, especially the ones that do want to replace their computer with an iPad Pro. Now, unfortunately, with all of these new features, and especially that storage bump, the price has also been increased. So the 10.5 inches iPad Pro now starts from $650 or £620. This is up from $600 or £550. And finally, probably the most important thing that I want to mention about this iPad is that it's simply an overkill in pretty much every single way. I mean, the 9.7 inches iPad Pro, the previous one, was already perfect. It was really fast, it had an amazing display, the battery life was just insane, the performance was just amazing. But this one not only gets improved cameras, improved performance, and improved display, not just in size, but also in the refresh rate. So many improvements, and a lot of them you don't actually need. Like, who really needs iPhone 7 cameras on an iPad? So in the end, is it actually worth it? I would say it depends on what you want to do with this iPad. If you wanted to replace your computer, then I would say yes, it's possible for this iPad to replace your computer if you just do light stuff. And even if you do demanding stuff like video editing, photo editing, you can actually do this on the iPad. iOS 11 is going to make the iPad so much more useful by bringing true multitasking and window support. But I personally feel like now the new iPad Pros, Apple's missing a regular iPad. So we have the new iPad, which is just called the iPad, and I've done an in-depth review on that in case you want to see that. But that iPad is basically, well, the iPad Air with improved specs. That's what that iPad is. So if someone wants to buy an iPad just like the iPad Air 2 was, so laminated display, a thin form factor, there's no current option for that. Hopefully the iPad Air 3 gets introduced at some point. But yeah, until then, this is the best iPad that you can buy. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you think it's worth it? Do you think it's not worth it, considering the higher price point? Also, feel free to subscribe if you have enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more videos like this one, I will be getting my iPad Pro 10.5 inches soon, so definitely stay tuned for a full in-depth review after a few more weeks of use. Don't forget to enable notifications on my channel by simply clicking on that bell icon so that you're notified whenever I upload a brand new epic video. Feel free to give this video a like if you have enjoyed it to let me know, and also let me know in the comments if you're epic enough to make it until the end of this video. But yeah, this has been pretty much it for this video, so thank you for watching until the end. I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Son of Tech, signing out.